They say necessity is the mother of invention, and certainly one of the biggest needs in the long history of war is to protect your people and land from invasion. That's why wars have been catalysts for changes and improvements that have had wide-reaching consequences. Computers, radio, sanitary pads, Kleenex, GPS, superglue, duct tape. These are only some of the many inventions that could be attributed to the needs of soldiers and the army. But perhaps the biggest area of development during the war, regardless of its era, is the steady advancement in weaponry over the ages. Since the dawn of civilization, one group of people has wanted to conquer another for resources and territory. As such, the arms race has always been in perpetual motion. Such is the case today. In 21st century wars, there are countless modern technological marvels to outfit soldiers and military equipment. The Russian invasion of Ukraine has done its fair share to improve the state of modern war machines. While the advances in this war might be considered slightly more pedestrian compared to the leaps taken during the 20th century, their benefits shouldn't be understated. Without the overwhelming support Ukraine has received from countries such as the US, Germany, the UK, and Norway, the capabilities would likely be much different than the 2-year prolonged warfare thus far. Ukraine's ability to resist Russian forces at every front and take back its territory is largely due to more advanced weapons. Let's take a look at some of the most devastating war machines and methods that the war in Ukraine has spawned over the past 2 years. Up first is the Storm Shadow missile, also known as the Scalp EG, short for Système de Croisière Autonome à Longue Portée, Emploi Général, or General Purpose Long-Range Autonomous Cruise Missile System. Storm Shadows are French and British premier long-distance ordnance and have been in active military use since 2003. It combines modern technology to deliver highly precise strikes to military targets. Unlike traditional artillery missiles, a Storm Shadow is more like a surgical strike. The first aspect that makes Storm Shadows more ominous than traditional missiles is their increased range. Unlike traditional unguided missiles, which have a range of around 60 to 70 miles, the Storm Shadow's range is roughly 155 miles. Its maximum operational range when paired with an aircraft payload system is about 340 miles, but the lack of available aircraft in the Ukrainian arsenal has throttled that capability. This has allowed the Ukrainian Defense Force to target deeper into Russian territory, taking out valuable targets from further away. The increased range has come in particularly handy in Crimea, allowing Ukraine to successfully remove the vital Konar Bridge that would otherwise support Russian advances toward the southeastern front line. Storm Shadows achieve this deadly precision at long range by combining 3 different navigational systems: GPS, INS, and TERCOM. The Inertial Navigation System, INS, allows the missile to calculate its position while in flight without external data sources, like satellites, to navigate it through the air. It works through a combination of motion sensors that allow the missile to determine its current heading precisely, including orientation and velocity. If the INS system isn't sufficient in determining the correct course the missile should take, it uses the GPS navigation system to detect its distance to the target, as well as receive updates on its current status. If you're wondering why the missile doesn't just stay connected to GPS throughout, the answer is additional security and reliability. If the missile were to only require GPS to function, then the electronics on board would be more vulnerable to disruption from enemy attacks. If Russians were to create a sufficiently advanced countermeasure system, it might be able to provide false location information to the onboard GPS sensors, making the missile go to a different target entirely. The third navigation system, TERCOM, Terrain Contour Matching, uses an onboard altimeter to compare nearby changes in elevation, hills and depressions, against its internal database. Unlike the GPS and INS systems, TERCOM allows the Storm Shadow to change its altitude much quicker, meaning it can travel closer to the ground. The lower operating altitude dodges enemy radar, giving the missile natural protection against being shot down by anti-missile systems that use it. The missile's miniature jet propulsion system allows the missile to move at Mach 0.95, slightly below the speed of sound, making it less perceptible until it actually hits the target. Even if the missile's long range and navigational capabilities don't make it deadly enough, the Storm Shadow's true lethality comes in the form of a delayed detonation. The missile carries 2 explosive payloads. The first, smaller one, is detonated when the missile comes into contact with the barrier on the target. The rest of the 900-pound warhead can then penetrate deeper into buildings or secured positions, allowing the rest of the ordnance to deploy within milliseconds to maximize its destructive capabilities. The incredibly short timing involved speaks of the engineering required to design a missile that would use this ability. In a way, Storm Shadows are more akin to pieces of technology like phones than simple military missiles. For that reason, the Storm Shadow is able to take out heavily enforced targets and strike deeper and farther into enemy territory, removing pockets of safety that would otherwise be present against traditional artillery. Perhaps one of the Storm Shadow's biggest victories in the Russo-Ukrainian conflict so far came on June 12, 2023, when a missile killed Major General Sergei Goryachev. Later in the year, 3 missiles annihilated the Russian Navy headquarters in the Black Sea, killing at least 34 people and wounding more than a further 100. One of the most significant limitations of the Storm Shadow missile is its relatively high cost compared to other ordnance. It's estimated that a single piece costs about $1 million to develop and build. The cost and technology involved means that France and the UK are woefully undersupplied, and they are the only ones supplying Ukraine with these missiles. French President Macron has announced on January 16th that France would supply an additional 40 Scalp missiles to Ukraine, a lower grade of Storm Shadow, allowing it to bolster its tactical and offensive operations. The suppliers are obviously not particularly keen on giving away the most sophisticated weapons to Ukraine. Furthermore, a major drawback of the Storm Shadow is that it needs to be launched from an aircraft. Unlike many other artillery units, which are truck-launched, due to Ukraine's relatively short supply of modified Sukhoi Su-24s, one of the few aircraft capable of carrying and firing Storm Shadows, the country's army must consider how and when to use this devastating weaponry very carefully. Due to these limitations, the Storm Shadow's use so far has generally been to pick off key components of the Russian war machine. While it remains one of the most capable tools of targeted precision strikes, it can't be used in the same vein as regular artillery to support a Ukrainian advance. Where Storm Shadows have limitations on how they can be deployed, the same can't be said for the US-provided ATACMS, or MGM-140 Army Tactical Missile System. Unlike the Storm Shadow, which needs to be fired from an aircraft, the ATACMS missiles are ballistic projectiles deployed from a ground vehicle, such as the US HIMARS already active in Ukraine. As a surface-to-surface missile, ATACMS are one of the most sophisticated long-range ballistics available for modern warfare. Unlike the Storm Shadows, ATACMS only use GPS and INS navigation systems. This leaves them slightly more vulnerable to interference and anti-missile defenses, since they don't travel on as low a projector. The ATACMS can make up for that in pure speed, with a top speed of around 2,300 miles per hour, Mach 3. The ATACMS is one of the fastest missiles available to the Ukrainian army. This combines with the stellar effective range of 190 miles compared to 150-ish miles of the Storm Shadows to ensure maximum coverage and provide effective strategic opportunities to destroy enemy reinforcements. Furthermore, the main benefit of the ATACMS lies precisely in the fact that it can be fired via HIMARS. These ground vehicles can be camouflaged and deployed across the country, ignoring the limitations of aircraft-borne missiles. You see, in order to position an air-to-surface missile, an aircraft needs to get into position, which naturally requires a nearby airfield and a lot of fuel to take the payload to its destination. By contrast, HIMARS can be loaded with any type of missile and left to be used when needed. This means that a fleet of HIMARS carrying ATACMS missiles can slowly traverse cross-country and support whatever operation is needed. This creates an unpredictable attack pattern where an enemy will have to actively scout for HIMARS and react accordingly. Additionally, since HIMARS carrying trucks store missiles internally, the enemy has no option but to guess whether any given vehicle is carrying a low-range artillery missile or a long-range ATACMS. Another benefit of the ATACMS missiles is that they can contain 2 types of warheads. The more basic munition is a unitary warhead, in which case the entire missile contains a single large explosive that detonates upon impact. The other is the submunition warhead. In this case, the warhead contains small explosive pellets, each akin to a shotgun pellet. When the missile detonates, it does so directly above or close to the intended target, and then the submunition pellets explode upon contact. This type of munition is much more effective when the missile needs to destroy a larger area. It's also a better anti-personnel missile, covering a larger field that can kill enemy soldiers en masse. Specifically, the Ukrainian army currently has access to the ATACMS M39 Block 1 missiles. These are submunition warheads that solely use INS to navigate and control the internal jet propulsion mechanism. Their range is also much lower, at only 100 miles, roughly half the maximum range of the ATACMS-class missiles overall. The use of these missiles has been a point of contention with the U.S. Previously, the Biden administration was hesitant to send ATACMS missiles to Ukraine, citing a lackluster domestic supply. However, it would turn out that the U.S. ended up sending the missiles quietly to Ukraine. They were first reported used on October 17, 2023, in a mission to destroy multiple Russian helicopters in the eastern part of Ukraine. Additionally, the U.S. administration reported that these missiles are already in the process of being obsoleted by newer generation weaponry that's currently in development. As such, what Ukraine is getting is basically the low-end capability of the U.S. Army. The replacement missiles, the PRSMs, precision strike missiles, have a range of 300 miles, far surpassing the capability of ATACMS to provide long-range artillery support, taking down key strategic targets. Therefore, we can safely assume that any wars the U.S. decides to enter, such as against Iran and the ongoing Israel-Palestine conflict, is bound to have even more brutal weaponry on display. If ATACMS has a limitation, it's that the missiles require a truck-driven launcher to function. However, the next weapon is purely infantry-bound, making it more versatile in skirmishes and anti-air defense. It's called the Starstreak missile, and it might be the most useful directly on the front lines. Classified as part of the Man-Portable Air Defense System, Starstreak missiles are human-operated and human-guided short-range missiles, with a range of roughly 4 miles. However, what Starstreak missiles lack in range, they make up for in sheer destructive power and precision. Each missile is equipped with not one, but 3 separate warheads, an explosive-laden tungsten dart that embeds itself into the target before detonating. This delayed explosion is similar to the Storm Shadow, maximizing the damage a missile can inflict on a target. Having 3 warheads also means the missile is more likely to hit its intended target successfully and accounts for possible failure to detonate. Starstreak missiles are also a generation above the traditional fire-and-forget heat-seeking missiles, such as the Stinger. While heat-tracking systems are highly precise, they can be spoofed by flares or other heat-emitting defense systems. In contrast, Starstreak missiles are laser-guided. Before an operator fires a missile, whether from a tank or from a manual launcher, they have to aim a laser at the intended target. The targeting system is loaded with checks and redundancies to ensure the target is correctly pinned by the laser. In the first iteration, the laser system used a single beam, which had a chance of failure if the operator missed the target. In the newer generation of the Starstreak, the targeting laser is often larger than the target itself, while still allowing the system to calculate the optimal trajectory and precisely lock on to a moving target. This makes the missile highly effective against stationary and slow-moving targets, but it also requires far more training and laser control from the operator than other weaponry that uses heat signatures or static GPS tracking. Additionally, modern warfare commonly uses drones as the first line of attack. These unmanned weapons have a lower heat signature than traditional vehicles, making it less likely for traditional heat-seeking missiles to lock onto them. Starstreaks also have an advantage over radar-targeted systems, since they can't be jammed by radar interference systems. Starstreaks remain deadly and precise even with this manual aim requirement due to sheer speed. With a top speed of around Mach 3, 2,300 miles per hour, the Starstreak missile is one of the fastest in its class, beating out the Stinger by about 100 miles per hour. This high speed and 3 times the number of active warheads means the enemy has fewer chances to react to the missile being fired. Due to its lower range, the Starstreak shines as an anti-air defense missile when in the hands of a skilled operator. This fact is precisely why the UK has decided to send a number of these missiles to Ukraine already in early 2022. Since the UK is unlikely to go into a defensive war soon, its need for Starstreak missiles is not that great at the moment, making it a perfect donation to Ukraine. A report from April 2022 suggested that the missiles have been successfully used to intercept and take down enemy aircraft. If all 3 warheads hit a helicopter, the vehicle is annihilated. But while Starstreaks, Storm Shadows, and the ATACMS are modern weapons that use state-of-the-art targeting and launching systems to ensure precision and deadliness, an older system remains one of the first lines of defense and offense and is used by Russia and Ukraine to further their goals in the war. The Soviet-era system is called the BM-21. It's a truck-based rocket launcher designed to fit 40 122mm missiles and fire them rapidly and indiscriminately toward the target. Unlike modern systems, the BM-21 doesn't have any guidance systems, and only a simple targeting system sets up the unitary warhead ballistic rockets and directs them toward the targets. Since the rockets follow a fairly basic ballistic trajectory, come in multiples, and are incredibly imprecise, the BM-21 system has earned the name Grad, hail in Russian, and it's been called the AK-47 of artillery due to its widespread use ever since its development in the 1960s. The system's ubiquity has led to numerous countries developing their own iterations or upgrades to the system. Each of the rockets fired from the BM-21 has a range of between 12 and 25 miles, depending on the exact production details and generation. However, the missiles are highly imprecise, losing most of their precision within 1 mile. The This basically guarantees that any given rocket will miss its intended target by a factor of a dozen feet. However, the system makes up for that with the sheer numbers. Since the launcher can fire its entire load of missiles in about 20 seconds, the end result is basically a sheet of explosive cover that's spread across the surface area of 10 football fields. This makes it highly likely that at least a few missiles hit near the target. Furthermore, the explosion can seriously injure or maim people within 50 to 100 feet. Due to these redundancies, this fairly inaccurate system has remained one of the most commonly used artillery and infantry support options for decades. While both Ukraine and Russia are using the BM-21s for their purposes, Russia is one of the world's leading developers and producers of 122mm missiles that fit the system. On the other hand, Ukraine is relying on importing its rockets from other countries, and reports have indicated that it's received 60,000 missiles over the course of the war. While it's well known that the US HIMARS is highly superior to the BM-21 in pretty much every aspect, bar their effective cost, both sides still rely on the BM-21 simply since the system is already in place and has been useful so far. One of the primary drawbacks of the launcher, apart from the fact that the missiles themselves aren't particularly sophisticated and are unguided, is that the truck offers minimal protection and defense. Even the more future-proofed iterations of the BM-21, such as the Czechoslovakian BM-70, offer minimal protection against enemy ordnance. If a truck were to pass over the missile, it would likely get destroyed, and the drivers would be killed in the process. This fact makes the BM-21s only effective in relatively safe areas and necessitates the operators quickly dismantle the launcher and drive off before the enemy can retaliate. But perhaps the most brutal weapon used in the Russo-Ukrainian war so far is one that has effectively been banned from production and use in over 100 countries so far. It's called a cluster bomb, and it's been used in wars ever since World War II. A cluster bomb is either a launched or airdropped munition that looks like an artillery shell. Each shell contains dozens to hundreds of smaller submunitions inside. Each submunition contains an explosive and an independent fuse that ideally detonates upon impact. When fired, the outer shell opens up and enables each submunition to fly independently, allowing a cluster bomb to cover an area equivalent to multiple football fields. The explosions can inflict severe damage to humans, vehicles, and buildings. However, in some cases, the damage from cluster bombs comes along after the initial bomb is dropped. The fuses built into the submunitions aren't perfect and can fail to detonate the explosive upon impact. When they fail, submunitions remain primed to explode at any moment and can be set off even by the lightest disturbance in its environment. This makes cluster bombing a severe humanitarian crisis, as unexploded munitions can maim civilians long after the war is over. Russia, Ukraine, and the US haven't signed the Convention on Cluster Munitions that prohibits the use of these weapons in armed conflict. As such, both parties in the war have freely used cluster bombs as anti-vehicle and anti-personnel systems. Ukraine is using a stockpile of cluster munition it received after the breakup of the Soviet Union, and Russia is doing the same. These older models have a munition failure rate as high as 40%, meaning that 4 in every 10 submunitions don't explode on impact and can detonate by themselves for over 30 minutes after the area has actually been bombed. Some of them remain inert until future perturbations, making these bombs incredibly unpredictable, which only adds to their deadliness. By contrast, the US is supplying Ukraine with newer generation cluster munitions, which reportedly has a failure rate of only 2 to 3%, making them far more effective and reliable. Still, the Biden administration only started supplying the munition after the Ukrainian government provided written assurance that it wouldn't be used in civilian areas to minimize the collateral damage. While the US tries to limit casualties by providing safer alternatives to older weaponry, such as the cluster bombs and the BM-21s, Russia uses tried-and-true methods that can have deadly consequences. One of these includes thermobaric bombs. Unlike a traditional explosive which creates a single blast, the thermobaric bomb has a two-stage detonation. First, the initial explosion releases a cloud of toxic and flammable gas. After that, the second explosive charge inside the bomb ignites the gas, creating a second shockwave that's capable of disintegrating organic matter entirely. The rapid spread pattern of the toxic gas means the bomb can bypass common protective shields and create a much wider destructive field than a traditional explosive. The Hague Conventions of 1899 and 1907 specifically consider the use of these weapons in civilian or built-up areas as a war crime. That didn't stop Russia from indiscriminately using thermobaric weapons just a few months into the war. The reports from the Russian Ministry of Defense have suggested that the Russian army has deployed its system of TOS-1A thermobaric rocket launchers to Ukraine and is set to use them to gain an advantage. Due to its effectiveness against spread-out targets, this type of weapon is commonly used against troops that hide in underground bunkers or in cave systems. This is something the US took advantage of when fighting terrorists in Afghanistan in 2001. The same methodology applies to trench warfare, something that has become common in Ukraine as one of the best defensive methods available to infantry. If Russia doesn't use the thermobaric weapons carefully, it can create much more destruction than necessary to obtain any kind of strategic advantage. But even these weapons, which can cause significant military and civilian casualties, aren't the entire extent of Russia's threats to Ukraine and humanity itself. Putin has been agitating for the use of tactical nuclear weapons since his initial plans to take over Ukraine in a matter of days failed. Even now, 2 years after the onset of the war, if Russia decides to press the nuclear button, the damage inflicted on Ukraine could rival that of Japan in World War II. Russia maintains the largest nuclear arsenal in the world, and the Tsar Bomba that they tested in 1961 was the single largest nuclear explosion. Even a tactical nuclear weapon, one that contains a fraction of the explosive potential of the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, could leave a lasting impact on Ukraine's forces and landscape and on the soul of humankind. Now check out Russia's secret weapon, how Putin is benefiting from other wars, or watch this instead.